Hello and welcome back to the One Radio Gamescast. As always, I'm your host Ryan, and I'm joined today by my lovely cohort of co-hosts, Wyatt,
Hello.
Alex,
I just rubbed pollen in my eyes. I swear I'm not
Yep.
high.
and definitely distractedly looking off screen, Brett.
Hello.
Oh,
I was reading my notes.
Oh, yeah. So it's episode number 111. We're all the way to the big triple one. That's an impressive number. So, of course, we're going to be talking about how different games solve the same problems, essentially, in different ways. With a specific focus on how games developed in different areas of the world kind of approach that, because, you know, we have a lot of American game developers that like to solve problems the same way. So,
by adding loot boxes.
Look, we'll get into this. We're going to have a big conversation, but first, we must atone for the sins of the games industry as we go over some news that happened this week. And we truly cannot go 2 weeks without Activision Blizzard King popping up somehow.
What did they do now?
No. This time it's admittedly a lot less malicious than it sometimes has been. But the gist of what has happened is that Activision Blizzard King is the mobile games division. We've been leaving them out of the title for a long time, but I've learned they are actually in the title of that big merged company entity. They have been quote-unquote using, the blog post said using, a diversity metric tool that worked by essentially going and what they would do is assign number values to different aspects of a thing. I'll see if I can find the specific categories for you, but it would be things like ethnicity, body type, gender, non-binary scale, sexuality. They use all the things that are very charged terms to use when discussing how to develop a character, especially on the internet. And they would have a nice little hex chart like you might see in a video game that has like different rankings, and it would be like a nice little polygon that they would form out of the different diversity metrics. This is a nightmare. This is a nightmare thing.
Can imagine. Oh my god.
Yeah, this is like
this is one of those things that it's hard to talk about, because the thing I want to make very clear here is that nobody thinks diversity. Nobody that is in like this podcast group, because this is the only group I can speak for, but nobody here, I guarantee you, thinks diversity is bad in video games, right?
No, absolutely not.
And I believe that was not the intent with this thing either. I don't think they thought this was the reception they would get, but that's kind of the problem. The fact that they couldn't see that this was going to happen is sort of the issue.
They never think that is the problem.
Because was this discovered, or did they put it out?
So they put this out in a blog post. They put this out excitedly.
I could maybe see this if it's like, well, like first of all, when you have like a quota for this sort of thing, you're already like, that's already like a step in the wrong direction in my book. But like, I could, if you're making like a bunch of characters or whatever, and you just need to see like how many of this kind of person we have in our game, like to keep that in the studio, and don't tell anyone.
Yeah. So we had this was called the diversity space metric, diversity space method. The categories were culture, ethnicity, age, ability, body type, gender identity, and sexual orientation. This is the kind of thing you shouldn't have to have this for your characters.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
It's because you have this implication with this that, okay, well, what is the center point? First of all, because these are all different things. So is our center point like the common media perception of what is the non-diverse person, or is it...
I can hazard a guess.
I mean, like the guess is it's the stereotypical white man, military man that is in most video games. Yeah. That would be my guess, but it's not clear. It's just a very interesting thing, because like Torbjorn's on this list, and Torbjorn has nothing in the culture category, and I'm like, okay, so Swedish is not diverse?
It's just no, like, oh my god.
I heard it first here. Swedes don't count.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's just such a weird thing to have for your games, because none of these are things that you can scale like this on a linear thing. So
they're not quantifiable. You can't attach a number to them at all.
yeah, and we have like more advanced versions of this that have been used in different types of games. So they made a couple of these for Overwatch. Important note here, the Overwatch team doesn't use this. There was a bunch of reports from Overwatch developers that were like, yeah, we've never used this. This is a thing that someone else has come up with.
Honestly, okay.
Wow.
That's honestly the funniest thing. It's like, oh, we have
Because
this
they're using
whole...
the Overwatch characters as an example for everything.
Oh my god. No, that's so funny. It's like, oh, we have
Don't
this whole
implicate us in
system.
this. What?
Like, look how inclusive we are. We have this whole system to do all these things, and then everyone else is like, yeah, what are you
Yeah,
talking
an Overwatch
What-
developer
yeah.
earlier put out a tweet that was like, yeah, we don't use this because we have eyes.
Yeah.
You can look at it and see. And like it gets even weirder because then they have like an expanded one, and there's new ones where cognitive ability is part of it, and facial features / beauty. And I'm like, this is getting
Well, it's just
what?
well,
Like
it's
dystopian.
no,
Cognitive
it's
oh my
kind of,
god.
this honestly feels like something that would be in like a Cyberpunk 2077 like side quest where it's like, hey, we're trying to reach a certain target demographic. We're gonna have this giant like
Cyberpunk dystopia.
chart with just all these
Yeah.
different like it's so weird. And kind of looping back to what you're saying, it's like them needing to use this at all is the problem, because all of these things should come as a natural part of the process of like designing a character, right?
Yeah.
Like whether it's how they look visually or their backstory and their character arc and stuff, all this stuff should just come naturally. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to like be put into this crazy like algorithm and then
And that's
That's
the
not how
thing
that
with
works.
this. The reaction to this hasn't necessarily been people are offended. It's just like disbelief. It's like, I can't
It's yeah.
believe
That's
that
what
this
it
is
has
a
to be
thing
at this
you had
point,
to
because
create.
they've done so much stuff. I feel like there's a point to which people can't be shocked anymore, which is bad because
Yeah.
things are
Yeah.
shocking.
well,
Okay,
what
like-
it's saying basically is like, without this, we are only going to make like what you said, the stereotypical like military white male with short hair. Like without this, there's nothing else we can do. So we have to use this in order to like expand what our
And
characters
that is
look like.
indicative of a much larger problem, if that's the
Yeah.
case, right? That is a mindset problem that needs to be
But to
changed.
me, that's what
That's what this hints towards, for
that's
sure.
what that
Mhm.
says.
Next,
which is an issue.
Next game, the only two characters you'll be able to choose from are John Smith and Smith Johnson.
Yeah, and I'll point to the Kotaku actually has a really good article about this fiasco that has happened, and I'll read a little excerpt of this. What does it mean when the picture in the blog post says that someone is sexual orientation 0.357? How do you even
What?
put that in front of someone and not feel weird about what you've
Is-
done or what you're saying?
Is that I'm so sorry if this comes off weird or as an unintentional pun for the first time in my life. Is this some weird person's take on the sexuality as a spectrum thing?
Dude,
I,
I
like-
don't know.
The spectrum is from 0 to 1.
If
and
the
all numbers in
assumption
between.
Oh my
if the assumption literally is like, oh, we've come up with the scientifically best way to make a diverse cast of video game characters, it's like, what did all the people
You've just
for
killed
the
the
last,
point
like,
of diversity, right?
It's you killed the point of diversity, and what have all the people for the last like 30 years of video games used? Like nothing. They didn't use any stupid chart at all. Like they just
They didn't need to.
it's this character is just gonna be like an African American dude, or this character is gonna be a girl, or this character is gonna be gay or something. It just happens. It doesn't. You don't need a chart. Make sure we
Yeah.
have one of each kind of human being.
And I
And, you
think
know,
you risk running into an issue here of like, well, if you then define what is the maximum diversity, right? What does maximum diversity look like? Then you might, miss out on a lot of groups that still to this day aren't in video games, like India. It's so little Indian representation is in games, and it just feels like it's so hyper focused. And I'm like, oh, well, you might present me with all these characters that could show up in like a modern day city. What about like Tibetan people? Why are they not included now? I think you've stumbled into this perfect storm of a terrible system of by
As
doing
they
this you create an
always
expectation that is
have.
ridiculous.
And
Yes.
the other issue you run into as well is that a lot of the best characters, like their identity is part of their like character arc or their backstory, right? And so if you have this whole thing, it's like, oh, this person is like a certain number of this and a certain number of this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't tie into who they are as a person anymore. It doesn't always have to, but a lot of the best characters, it involves who they are as a person in some way. And here's just all of these traits, and it has nothing to do with their backstory. They are just this, and so you kind of limit that kind of.
I'm just imagining what this would be like if I start to play like Apex Legends or something, and it shows this little scale next to every character. I'm just like,
God.
come on.
Dude, the Space
God.
Australian scale would be off the charts for
It's
Apex.
so
Are you kidding
crazy.
me?
Yeah, no, this is a nightmare scenario. It's hard to talk about this in depth without going into a lot of systemic problems that we can't solve. Look at this podcast. As much as I love it, is a group of white men.
There's literally, not only is there only like so far that we can go, there's also like, listen, we could probably say something that could be misconstrued into something a lot worse than what we mean, and that is not just because we're just four white dudes with varying levels of facial hair sitting across from each other, but like unless maybe at some point I could very well see us doing like a serious like let's talk about this as the topic for like
but if we were doing that, I think we would try to pull in some people that have more to say on it.
We would,
I mean,
and you know what, we would use the metric, obviously, Ryan. I think we would make sure that we had all the check boxes.
We want to make sure we have the most possible diversity.
Can you imagine, like, because obviously, like, I hope obviously, like, the people that come up with this horrible numbering system for like aspects of a human being, like, they can't think that like actual nature and nurture for a real human being resulting in who they are is like, you can't put a real person on that number chart. They don't actually think that, right? Because I would be very scared if they actually thought that they could do that with a real person, because that is so wrong.
I think some people genuinely think that. I hope they don't work there.
I hope they're not the people in power right now.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm struggling with too, and this kind of depends on who came up with this system, like who specifically came up with this system. But it's like, was this even made with like the best intentions in mind? Because like at first I was like, well, I guess
money.
Maybe, and then I was like, wait a minute, no, that doesn't make any sense. So it's like, I don't know.
No, if they're putting this to a metric, they want to appeal to the most diverse groups of people, because they want to make more money.
Because to them it's like, okay, if we have like a diverse range of characters, right, then people are going to praise that, and maybe that'll bump up our number score in an IGN review by another point or something.
Yeah,
like
everyone is represented.
Yeah.
Yep. And this being someone that plays a lot of fighting games, the diversity discussion plays a little bit differently with fighting games, because Maximilian Dude, who is a really, really good fighting game YouTuber that goes over a lot of like metrics of fighting games and how they're developed and talks a lot about the behind the scenes stuff, has talked before about this diversity problem. And the thing with diversity in a fighting game is having a diverse fighting game roster just means a better roster. Like they're the same metric at that point. Like if you have, I don't want 15 different white dudes that I can play as. I want like a Muay Thai fighter. I want like all these other different cultural inspired characters, which is what most games are starting to do. And it's, I think, proving that point that like the aspect of fighting games people enjoy is the different styles you can have, and different styles come from different parts of the world, and that necessitates creating characters that look like they are from different parts of the world.
It would be like,
which is a natural solution to that.
It would be like playing Street Fighter, but every single character is Ryu.
Look, it's already kind of Street Fighter. But it's already sort of like that.
It's like playing Mortal Kombat and everyone's just Johnny Cage.
Oh,
like imagine
that would be based.
No.
But from like a writing standpoint too, right? I feel like characters who come from different, backgrounds have different, identities and stuff. That comes naturally from two things. One is when you have like diversity in the writers' room, right? Like I feel like
Yeah.
people
That's
want
a
to
big
write
one.
what they've experienced, and so that that kind of diversity comes from that. But it's also like sometimes writers are just like, I just want to write a different kind of character. Like, okay, I've
Yeah.
written my like, you know, white buzz cut military guy. I want to write someone. I want to write something completely different, and just because. Just to keep your brain active, so you're not writing the same character.
But I
Every
might be
'cause-
making this up, but I feel like George R. R. Martin did like a talk on that at some point where he was like, yeah, the reason I like to do multi-perspective books is because I can write from different characters' views and like, approach how would they think this situation is different from another character.
Yeah.
Which is like always, I think, a really interesting thing to explore. And that comes into play in games like It Takes Two, right? Where it works super well to have these two different characters that kind of approach situations differently and seeing how those affect them. And it's just such a shame that we've had to now turn this into a metric.
Yeah.
Like it now
'Cause-
has to be a number so that the people making this can understand that they need to put effort into creating these characters.
you can't at this point they're the mindset is like, we can't just leave this up to our writers and our, you know, character artists to make distinct, you know, diverse characters. We have to come up with this whole system.
And
Which
now
just
I'm
shows-
worried now.
Yeah, and it
that-
just shows an extreme lack of faith in your own team.
And what worries me about that is that even if the team that they have a lack of faith in is using this tool, they're still not going to write these characters as if they are from different parts of the world, as if they have these different backgrounds and whatnot, because they're going to approach writing them the same way that they would approach writing any other character, which is the same. It's not going to be different. And that's a real problem for this kind of thing. So I think hopefully this backlash has shown that maybe this is not the direction to go. At the very least, this is not a thing that you publicly parade around as if it's good.
Have they said
Quite
like,
brazen, really.
have they said, because I haven't read this like post myself, but have they talked about like, oh, we've been using this for a while, or oh, we just came up with this and we're gonna start.
It's confusing. They've said a couple of things that none of them quite work out to being what it should. The gist of it is they have said it's going to be used in some actively developed games. It hasn't been, from my understanding, none of this reads that it has been used in a released game. But it looks like they were gearing up, from all the images being Overwatch characters. I think this is gearing up to say they were going to start using this tool for Overwatch 2. Which probably, from the sounds of it, would have been a surprise to the Overwatch team.
Yeah,
Well, also,
they reacted that way.
Well, also the Overwatch team, like, for all that we have to say about Overwatch in its current state, right? They don't need this.
They don't. Yeah.
They are
If
one
anything, they've gone like you already have people like making fun of them for it. You don't need like more. They're already doing a great job having like a huge cast of diverse characters from every walk of life possible, and in a world with like robots and crazy like wars having gone on in the past, and they still managed to insert like real life cultures and stuff. And it's not because it's like, if any, even let's say magically somehow, I know, never heard before that a game dev team is all white people that have never, you know, that they have no diversity on their game dev team at all. Maybe they're good writers and good character designers, and they just did a lot of research to make sure that these characters from other cultures, they asked family or friends that they made sure that these characters who are of a different culture, different sexuality, different whatever than they are actually like solid enough that they feel like as well written as any other guy, gal, anything.
Yeah.
It's just like they didn't need a metric for that. It's just, oh, I want to have this character in the game because I'm interested in the culture they're from, or I just want to try writing this character and I have a lot of people and resources that can help me doing that, or my friend wants to write this character and they are pretty much this character. There's no like quota to follow. It just happens.
And it's like Overwatch has changed a lot. No one's happy with its current state. No one's happy with Overwatch 1.5 or anything like that. But it's one of those things that I still feel like is given the proper amount of praise. It's still one thing that they have done really, really well ever since they've launched. You know, they don't need something like this.
All right.
Not that anything does.
So with that discussion out of the way, which was just as explosive as I was hoping it would be.
Congratulations.
This was the big thing that happened in the past week of this crazy thing being revealed. We do have some other minor things.
Do we have
Redfall and
any good news?
Starfield.
Oh.
Alex.
Good
this
news
could
for
be
me.
this could be construed as good
Darn.
news because it's not going to be released in a bad state.
Not
hopefully.
yet.
The most it affects me right now is just Fantasy League stuff.
Pretty
Yep.
much, yeah.
So Redfall and Starfield both delayed to 2023. This to me surprising, at least on the not in Redfall's case. Redfall I was expecting this with, but
Because they only had one teaser.
Starfield to me is, I think it's because Bethesda got into the habit of they hide game footage until the last like 3 months before a game comes out, to where I think you can kind of trick yourself into thinking it's okay, like that they're not showing a lot, because it could be, right? It could just be they're not showing much. So yeah, they've stated both of these games are going along well, and they're just nervous that they don't want to recreate Cyberpunk.
Which good.
Oh,
Nobody
or
should.
Fallout or
Which-
Fallout
actually-
76.
Actually, on that,
Yeah.
I have a question. On the, because I believe it was the 12th, right, when they were having a press conference or a reveal type
Yes.
thing. Was that?
Yeah.
Did they end up showing footage from Starfield, or was it just the announcement that they're being delayed?
It was just the announcement.
June 12th is the Xbox.
June 12th is
event,
when
the
we
thing that
expect
has not
gameplay.
happened yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Which they could
And-
still
and-
show something. It's just
and
not
to
gonna
their
be coming
credit,
this soon.
To their credit, the practice of showing gameplay 3 months before launch is a pretty good thing to
Yeah,
to
just
follow.
say the game's in production and then just stay silent until it's ready to be revealed. I'm okay with that. But then you
When
run into
it's
some
ready.
issues. The issue comes when the time between the announcement and the it's ready to be revealed is over like 3 years. At that point, I'm concerned looking at you, Dragon Age. So,
Just
yeah.
say I'm looking at you, BioWare. Okay, that's
you-
a more fitting
BioWare in
scope.
general. Yeah. So this is definitely it could be cause for concern. This is the first delay that we know of. If they get delayed again, I think that's cause for a lot of concern. As of right now, it's just cause for a little bit of concern. So, we'll see. Because I've been on a Bethesda splurge lately, playing both Fallout 4 and Skyrim and Morrowind, kind of back and forth and going through between all of them.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I think that the thing with those games is, even if they have a lot of issues, there's just nothing else like it. Because no other team has the ability to create a world where you can pick up like every object in it. It's just not feasible for most of these teams to do. So
for better
this
or
is
for
what
worse.
I'm so eagerly awaiting.
For better and for worse, you know when you're playing a Bethesda game, and that's something that I feel
This
like
is
is lost a lot now, where because things are all trying to homogenize into one another.
Well, that's
So-
that's something that I believe Todd Howard said that he this could have been a fever dream, or I remember it from somewhere, but I
A lot of
need
Todd
to find
Howard
the source
is
again.
fever dreams. So.
Like,
Yeah,
like him, like I hope that's a Photoshop picture of him in the Teletubby outfit with a shotgun.
I hope it isn't. That's
I'm
amazing.
sorry. Wait! Stop!
He was president of the
We'll
chess
show
club,
it to you after. We'll show it
What?
to you after.
What are
worry.
you talking about?
But it was either Todd Howard or it was one of the devs, where they were talking on, we've made the more generalized games. We have our audience. We believe it's time that we can start, making them more more not complicated, bringing more complexities to the game systems, which I'm hearing
Yeah.
as by the time Elder Scrolls 6 comes back, we can finally have acrobatics again.
I have an interesting perspective on this, because going back and playing Morrowind and playing Skyrim at the same time is very interesting, because of how different they approach the same thing, which is actually like the topic of this episode. So I'm going to use this as a kickstart. We don't have a lot of other news to talk about, so we're just going to go directly into it with this, and start out just by comparing two games from the same company. Because I
Right
think
there with you, Ryan. Don't worry.
Morrowind has this idea of everything is a stat that you work at. And as you start very inexperienced, and you work up to being good. And you have all these different things you can do, like even swords and bladed weapons are split into two categories. You have short ones and long ones, which makes sense. But with Skyrim, instead, you have perks. And you have a perk tree that is one-handed. So you've combined the like 6 different Oblivion or Morrowind and Oblivion skills into one tree of things, and then you have sublines in that tree that go bladed weapons get this, swords get this, maces get this. And I honestly think I kind of prefer the Skyrim approach comparatively because and now I'm not going to say Skyrim's skill system is good. It needs a lot of work. It's not great. I have tons of mods that make it a lot better, but having those like perk points where every level up you get a very demonstrable thing that changes, where you have every time you level up, it's not just okay. You might get a thing that's like, oh, you do 5% more damage, right? That's fine. But you get the more fun things that are like, okay, if I hit someone with a mace, I reduce their armor. You know, you get unique reasons to use every weapon, and it also kind of hints you as to like why these would have different abilities, which I think is an interesting approach. That isn't to say the Morrowind system is bad. In fact, I like it about as much. It's just a different approach, but it feels a little bit more gamey in Morrowind, I would say, because you have to hack at a tree, at like an immobile thing until you can hit the percentage roll to hit it this amount of times to get your skill up. So
yeah, you have training dummies in a house you can get that actually work on training your abilities, and it's Morrowind is much more because this was the first this was the first Elder Scrolls title that was available for both PC and console, and it's definitely in the more still in the more PC realm where it's working on advancing those micro percents to get better over several levels as opposed to just having a difference, seeing a difference in 1-to-1.
yeah, it's definitely an interesting twist of different approaches, and I think it works pretty well in both games for the most part because they are very differently designed. It kind of plays to both strengths in the end, just with the fact that like Skyrim's perk trees by default are incredibly boring. They're very silly and not very fun. As soon as you slap any number of the like 1,000 mods that change them, they become a lot more interesting, and your game has become much more unique through just the inclusion of those. So I think it's definitely a good spot to be in because that's the Fallout approach. That's how Fallout works. Is the perks are always the like big thing that you work towards, and your skills are the more minor passive enhancements as you level them up. So it's just an interesting difference. All right, let's go into some other games. Brett, I know you have a big list of notes. You want to kick us off with something?
I'll stick on a similar track, because I
All right.
rather than comparing two games from the same company, I'm gonna be comparing two companies from the same company.
All right.
Because I've split my notes, my sheet, into two sides. I have on one side Brett likes, and on the other side Brett no likes, and that could
Nice.
range from hate to just being the opposite of the thing that's on the Brett likes side. I don't hate all the things that are on the Brett
The
not
Brett
likes side.
lightly
They have
doesn't
to be
like.
different. Exactly, yeah. It's
Not
it's,
your
ju-
thing,
it's just
but it
negative
doesn't-
enough.
Not your
Brett's
thing, but it
mild
doesn't
discomfort.
aggravate you. in any way.
Exactly, yeah. So on and I'm like obviously generalizing here is a bunch of games we don't have a lot of time on. On one side, I have Halo 1, Halo 3, Halo ODST, and Reach. And these are the campaigns specifically because multiplayer would have taken me way too much time and I was already very tired writing these. And on the other side is Halo 2, Halo 4, and Halo Infinite because I did not want to include Halo 5 because it is so far off the other side that it would not fit within the critiques that I would like to compare between these groups of games.
Doesn't deserve to even be
It
on
would,
your.
it would be
don't
my
list
Call
list.
of Duty rant coming from Brett's mouth.
Yes. Well, we had that like a couple weeks ago, don't worry. And I know obviously Halo 2 is not a 343 Industries game, but after playing it again recently, I found that I like it just about as much as I like Halo 4. And I was thinking about it, and that's why I came to some of these conclusions. And it's that the ones that I at least really enjoy story wise, obviously all of them pretty much they have like that usual Halo feel of just like simple, just run around, jump and shoot. You don't even have to bother aiming in unless it's the sniper, like that sort of thing. Just like super simple, satisfying, tried and true gameplay loop. Like very little, very few changes to that basic gameplay loop and that constant rock paper scissors that the Halo devs always talk about like what's you only hold two guns and you have a melee. What's the best pairing of guns for this situation, and then what ones can you pick up off the ground, which ones are hidden around the corner, and that sort of thing. And then another thing from the ones that I like are solid, like actual evolution from the previous title. Like maybe not like mechanically, but you could see Bungie improving from the last title that they made by they added this, or maybe the lighting in this one is all of a sudden really good, or the story in this one is like the best and it uses all the knowledge they got from the past ones of the series. um and the big thing for me that you can really feel while playing is that 1-3 ODST and Reach, if you go to someone and you go, hey, what's, assuming they know what a set piece is and won't like punch you in the stomach immediately upon approaching them and like asking them to talk about a video game randomly. That part's not part of the hypothetical. If you go up to someone in the street and you ask them, what's your favorite set piece from Halo? They're gonna tell you something from Halo 3, from Halo Reach, from Halo 1. I was really thinking about it. Outside of the first and last missions in Halo 2, where the set pieces go? Wait, okay. I just walk. As this
You do
fine
the
jump and
walk?
shoot missions, but you just walk. The first couple missions, you got the cool cutscene where he goes giving the Covenant back their bomb, and then the bomb blows up. It's oh man, that was cool. And the last mission has you're the Arbiter, and you're doing the worst boss fight in the series. I'm glad they didn't bring those back. Cool like set pieces that are memorable. Halo 3 has one like every single mission, like every single cutscene is like cinematic gold. Like they're using like cameras that are attached to the side of like pelicans and stuff like that. And which they kind of like try to do sometimes in Halo 2, but they just don't really. And even then, the set pieces are not in the level design of 2 or of 4, because 4
Well, 4
has that
tries, but then you have the
4
terrible
tries.
shoot 'em up segment.
Is the
Yes.
silent cartographer from 1?
Silent Cartographer is from 1.
Yep.
4 tries to do the set piece thing, but every time it tries, it has a couple things that are constantly pulling down on it to make me go, well, this looks cool, but like you finally get to fly the Pelican. It's the thing everybody wanted. Is there a secret way to jump into the Pelican Sergeant Johnson's in and fly it around? It's got like a Spartan laser on it or something. Totally, and they're lying. It's not true. You can't do that. But in Halo 4, you can. And the level is beautiful. You're like at the top of like the wonderful bed of clouds, these huge 400 towers sticking out of it. It's one of those things that I've said before. I love it when the concept art just ends up in the game. And that is just 3D concept art that's in the game. Visually, that's like such a cool mission. What do you fly the Pelican to? 3 copy paste gray things that just get more tedious every time because they're gondola sections that you just have to sit on one thing when it goes to the other side? And then you
You
fight.
don't love a gondola section in your Halo game, Brett?
Oh man, I'm so glad Halo 2 popularized standing in one spot and waiting to get to the other side. That's so much fun. And then you're fighting the worst enemies ever, the Prometheans. I hate them so much. They're not fun thematically and they're not fun mechanically to fight because they're just bullet spongy, and the ones that aren't are too fast. And then you do that 3 times and the mission's over. It's like, okay, well, I wish it was just flying the Pelican for a little while and then the next part of the mission starts. Like Halo 3 has the thing where like, okay, you took down the shield barrier on the Ark. Now you have a cool, like, it's just 5 minutes. It's a cool flying
Brett,
segment.
you know what you've just described? The exact opposite of the Miyamoto Nintendo approach of only use a gimmick for exactly as long as it's good and then drop it forever.
Exactly.
Like every Mario game has nailed that perfectly, pretty much. Aside from like the odd new Super Mario Bros. U thing, 2D Mario levels that just go on forever. Generally, at least the 3D Mario games get that perfect and just like stop exactly when they need to.
And which is exactly what the comparison I was going to make is the Halo 3 one on the Ark, where it's just like on foot mission, just 5 minutes of fun flight segment where you're in the Hornet and you're blowing up Banshees and Phantoms, and then you're on the ground again, and then you're in a tank, and then you're in the air again, but this time you're blowing up 2 Scarabs at once, and then you're on foot again, and then you're on foot again, but it's versus the flight, and it's just constant, like, oh my god, cool thing that was
changing
different from before.
constantly.
Exactly. And then Halo 2, 4, and Infinite, it's like, okay, how many times am I going to go down the same hallway? That's just clearly like not even like this is the same crate or this is the same centerpiece. It's just the same hallway. It's just reversed so that it could connect smoothly with the
Oh,
previous hallway. That's all high charity is. Why do people like it? It sucks. I don't understand. It's so boring. And then, which I'm not saying that specifically out of the ones that I like, Halo 1 is definitely guilty of this sometimes, but those segments are so short for the most part, except for the library where it's just
I was
like,
just gonna bring that up.
it's, yeah.
man.
Except for, again, the exception is the library. Except for that, like, the Forerunner hallway sections are just like short little, like, there's little straight lines, and they vary them up, and the rooms are like round and have little barriers so that you have your hallway shooter segments and your shooter from 2001. Okay, you're allowed to have those. You're a shooter from 2001. And speaking of shooters from 2001,
Halo Infinite?
people don't. Foo. People
I
don't.
was so certain you were about to go directly into the copy paste and Forerunner architecture everywhere.
Well, because that's the thing. Also, with Halo Infinite specifically, I will go back and mention that again. With that is because you really feel it there. I don't know if it's just
Because
because
there's
it's
no
like really
interiors aside from it. There's like
Exactly,
one cool
yeah.
banished base, and the rest are underground Forerunner thing.
yeah,
looks the
which is
same.
fine because it's been done before and you could do that. But like, you're on a shattered section of a giant metal like Earth ring in space, and you're
Give
gonna
us like
put
a
me.
spacewalk or something. You've got
Like
so many
spacewalk
Oh, that
opportunities.
would be
or
so
like
cool.
just like
The snowy
another.
mountains that they keep
It's
showing off.
snowy mountains, all those different biomes that Halo Infinite has, all that mission variety visually that Halo Infinite we talked about for over
That
2 hours
that
has.
that mountain that you can definitely climb to the top of.
Oh, you can. Well, maybe you can't anymore because they definitely didn't remove the fun physics glitch with the fusion coil anymore. They definitely kept that in because 343 likes when you have fun in the sandbox. Um,
Hmm.
but Halo 1, but what I was gonna say, Halo 1, people don't look back on it and go, "Oh, well, it's a game from 2001. Let grandpa cross the street, just help him across, make sure just stop the cars or whatever." No, Halo 1's here. It's gonna kick ass. People are still gonna play it to this day. It has, you can switch it from the old new graphics and Master Chief Collection with just a button press and there's no delay. It's great. It barely, other than the floaty controls and one mission, barely feels old at all. Like if that came out and it had New Blood's name on it or Devolver's name on it, oh, people be all over it. People eat that crap up because it's great. It's timeless. And I go back, I went all back and I played all these games, same difficulty, heroic, like I always say I do. I go back and play Halo 2, and it's like I just want to play a different game. And it's sad because I remember everyone talks about Halo 2 being like, "Oh, this is the Times Square was full when this game was about to come out on the midnight releases. Just look at all those sweaty gamer boys in Times Square just like crowding the streets with all their Master Chief costumes on." And then I'm playing on heroic, and it takes me like 3 magazines to kill a brute because they ran out of time, so they just copy pasted rooms and they put 40 brutes in one hallway. And it's like,
So Brett,
okay.
I do want to extend this conversation outwards of just Halo because you just described a problem with a very good game that released just this year. Oh, Elden Ring. How
Whoa,
we
Elden
love this
Ring.
game. It's so good. But the Crucible Knights.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Crucible?
so many of them. They're like a little Dragon Knight themed thing that shows up, but they have so much health, so much like
They don't
damage
stagger.
reduction.
Was that one of the
Yeah.
guys you fought in the little starry underground?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
It's the basic enemy that I think Brett and I both took longer on the first time we fought one than most bosses.
Yes.
It doesn't reward you for defeating it. There's no good.
You got
Oh.
nothing.
You get basically nothing. It's one of the few examples in that game of just like, okay, just put the hard enemy that's very annoying to fight everywhere, and then in one area we're just gonna put 2 of them.
Because we definitely didn't forget that we put one in that little corner over there that's kind of off to the side and just put one right next to it by accident, like we do with other things all the time. Thank you, FromSoft.
I just want to point out most games make this mistake, and it's not. We're not saying the game is bad for making that mistake, but it is a problem.
We're not saying it's bad. We're saying it should feel bad.
It should.
We're saying do better.
Yes, because you do in every other aspect, Elden Ring. Unfortunately, in my opinion, Halo 2 doesn't. But
bringing it back.
It's weird for me having gone back and played the whole, like, or at least I didn't want to play 5 or Infinite again. Playing most of the franchise again, just to see that, you know, one of the games that should be beloved kind of go in the same, like, chunk as the 343 ones. Which, again, I don't want to say the 343 ones are bad. It's just they have a lot of things that the Bungie games get really, really right. And it's weird that you have a lot of the devs from Bungie still in 343 in, like, higher positions than they used to be because they had to fill spaces. There were power vacuums and they were there when it was still Bungie, so they had to fill them. And they're making the same choices, but, like, incorrectly. It's so weird how, like, you could play Halo ODST and you have in between every story important mission a very small, very controlled, very content filled and atmospheric and diverse that doesn't look like anything else open world, where you can find certain missions out of order from each other and then go do that mission from the piece of armor or piece of wreckage you found. And you can find weapon caches that give you vehicles that you can't find anywhere else to get through the world faster. There's no, like, fast travel or anything because that's the atmosphere. They emphasize the atmosphere. They put sacks in the game. Of course they emphasize the atmosphere.
Oh.
They want you to travel. Everything in the open world is there for a reason. It doesn't feel like, oh, what's the trend right now is to, okay, well, we'll just make on the left side of the map, we'll just make sure that there's, like, a wide open space where you can go and all the missions are just going to be in one, like, straight line curve through it, which is just, like, it's so weird that if you write just certain aspects of them, Infinite and ODST are such similar games on just, like, written down aspects on a piece of paper. There are a lot of things that go between them. And then Halo ODST is one of my favorite games ever. And then Halo Infinite is, like, one of the most forgettable ones that I've ever played. It's so weird. And they're made by similar groups of people, too.
To play devil's advocate just a tiny bit, because listen,
You're allowed.
because here's the thing. Because here's the thing. I'm not a huge fan of the open world either, and we've talked about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do think part of the reason they did what they did was I think definitely part of it is, like, okay, open world is kind of the thing, right? But I do think there's an element to it of, like, that's what Halo was going to be originally. Like, they had tested around with, like, this kind of explorable open world planet idea, right? And it never made it into the final game because, you know, they had to switch platforms and then cobble together what they had in, like, 10 months or whatever. But that was the original idea, and I feel like they were trying to tap into that, where it's like,
oh,
okay,
they totally
what were they?
Definitely the intent, but whether or not they succeeded at that,
that's a different matter.
Super up in the air.
That's a different matter. I did want to say that because it was in the back of my mind, where it's like, I do feel like that decision in a large part came from a very genuine place of, like, you know, of like looking back in reverence and not simply just, okay, open world games, that's the thing, let's do that.
Yeah, I think that what happened is they looked back in reverence, then we're like, okay, well, how do we translate this to modern day, and then looked at Far Cry, and we're like, oh, perfect formula.
Yeah,
I would say that the cynical part of my brain too would be like, oh, well, I guess this was the original plan. Lucky for us, open world games are the thing right now.
Yeah, it does.
Would you look at that?
The devs have even, like, they've pointed out, like, those Halo 1 levels of silent cartographers and the Halos where it's just like you could pick what you want to do in what order, or there's just like wide,
Yeah.
vast, open green plains, which is it's huge for a game from 2001 in the FPS genre. It's like that's why part of why it's so influential and respected. But like, I don't know, when Halo came out as the mostly linear first-person shooter with wide open sections, didn't come out as an open world game. So by this point, you have the Halo community and apparently the devs also that are used to mostly linear first-person shooter game with wide open areas and not an open world game. Because like,
this is like
I don't know.
This is another interesting thing that plays into, I think, the wider sphere of development of I really wish more Western studios would cooperate with other Western studios that are like not under the same publisher. Or something.
Yeah.
Because like that's the thing we see all the time in especially like Europe and Asia. We'll see like Eidos working with someone else in Canada. We'll see Nintendo constantly working with like I forget the studio that made Luigi's Mansion, but other studios that do that. This is a studio that does Mario Strikers is a completely outside of Nintendo studio.
Breath of the Wild wasn't
Breath
purely
of the Wild was
developed by
Monolith
Nintendo.
Soft, which is
Right.
a JRPG developer. So I think there's like so much you can learn from doing that just by like, okay, Breath of the Wild, we have a team that knows how to do Zelda. So what do we need? A team that knows how to do open world. But in the context of a character-focused game with this like Japanese flair, who do we talk to? We talk to Monolith Soft, who makes these sprawling open world vistas in all of their JRPGs, and we take that with the gameplay of the Breath of the Wild team, and guess what? You've got a winner.
See, the thing is that studios working together does happen in the West. It's just never a good sign, right? It's like
It's 'cause EA.
Fallout 70, right.
Yeah.
Fallout 76 is coming out. We're gonna have a bunch of our Bethesda studios working out. We also got Arcane working out. We got
It just feels like there's no like logic to it, right?
like-
it feels like they throw
it's-
everything at the wall instead of
Yeah.
taking people
because
that
what it-
are there for a reason.
What it says to me, it's like, oh god, this game's a mess. We need more manpower. Not we need to use
Yes.
this specific
Yeah.
studio. It's like, okay, we went to id Software because they know shooters really, really well, and we want to
Yep.
take some of those like mechanics from like Doom or Wolfenstein or something and like apply it to like a Fallout game. No, it's just we need manpower to
Yeah.
finish this and get it out the door as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Like,
finish
man,
it.
I
It's
would
like,
have
We
loved-
did a crossover because 3 of our employees worked themselves to death because of crunch.
Man, I would have loved
Bye.
if the Avengers developers, Eidos and good old Crystal Dynamics, had talked to Naughty Dog or something, and like gotten them in, and maybe Crystal Dynamics and Eidos handle the gameplay, Naughty Dog handles the story, and you get a good mix of the two, you know? And it's just it's hard to do that. It's very difficult, and of course it's extremely time consuming. The money is a huge concern of how you split it between all these different studios, but I think the biggest reason that doesn't work out so much is so many Western developers are so focused on hyper-realism and pushing budget as far as it can go
Yeah.
in terms of
Or
like
further.
interactivity and just I think there's a reason that like the best looking game to come out of Japan in a while is probably Elden Ring, which maybe doesn't look that great all the time. You know, I think it's indicative of a wider like dichotomy in how they look at development and how games are perceived, where a lot of people here I think game studios are doing the capitalism thing. They're doing the capitalism thing of let's keep raising the expectation so that people will pay more in the future, and then just forgetting the fact that you need to continue to raise the expectation to have that.
Exactly, yeah.
It's infinite
You
growth.
also-
It's not sustainable.
No, and it makes you wonder too. It's like how much of like
Inflation.
okay, like all of our games have to be like cutting edge. They have to look like you got to see every single pore on someone's face. It's like how much of that is for the artistic integrity of your project, and how much of it is okay. This is going to look really good at
In marketing.
every level. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
thing. 'Cause, like,
I
it's hard
wonder
to
so much.
convey- It's hard
It's
to
gonna be a pain
convey
for artists to get done.
like it's hard to convey controls and like certain systems and stuff just through a reveal, right? Like try like because I've been playing Shadow of War recently, trying to explain every aspect of the Nemesis system to someone without them playing it is kind of difficult because you don't have that larger
There's
context.
no
So
frame
it's
of
like, okay,
reference.
exactly. So it's like okay, we can just the game will look really pretty. It'll make people buy it. Go.
Yeah.
I don't know how to we don't know how to explain the whole like recruit anyone system in Watch Dogs Legion properly. It'll just look really pretty. Go buy it.
Yep. And why you've actually touched upon what one of the next like pairs of types of games I want to look at are. But first, I do want to mention that like we're talking about visual realism as like the Western developers, rabbit's foot, monkey's paw, in terms of visuals and development here. Not to say Asia doesn't have that. Asia absolutely has the same thing. It's character design. It's the like having to advertise games. Like go look at a Japanese announcement trailer of most games. You'll see static images of characters and voiceover of random voice lines. Like there's a reason all these trailers are like this in Japan because they work. Like for the Japanese audience, and it to us it seems insane. It's like I just heard a bunch of nonsense quotes.
Downright incoherent at times.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I feel like this is how other people would feel about the same thing in different parts of the world. You know, there's no one answer for this. It's just everywhere has their own monkey's paw of marketing that is there to make everything look bad to everyone else.
And in that specific instance, right? Because I know I've experienced this before, and I'm sure a lot of other people do too. When you see a trailer like that's like random voice lines, you get a lot of shots of just like a character model or something. It's like, is this from like a well-established series? And so they're riding on like the nostalgia.
It does feel like
this
that.
person is?
But then it's like the Geofield Chronicles.
It's
then
it
it's
just
like,
has some weird name.
Yeah, but then it's like some original like thing that isn't based on anything, but that's how it's marketed. It's like, wow, look, it's a Star Wars thing. It's like, wow, look, we got Boba Fett. We're gonna have 50,000 shots of like Boba Fett because you know Boba Fett. It kind of feels like that almost.
Except you've never seen this Boba Fett before. It's just
exactly.
Like
I would say a lot of it is about voice actors, especially coming
that
from a Western perspective. If you don't understand the language a game is in, you're probably not going to recognize the same voice actors a lot.
Mm-hmm.
When you've played as many JRPGs as I have, you start to pick up on people. And when I see this character in this game getting this moment in a trailer, I'm like, okay, they like this person. That's why they're being advertised as like the main character of this game.
And
they're banking on that VA.
Well, and the other big thing too is that like Western game trailers are often very like dramatic, right? It's like, oh, we're gonna open on like I'm thinking of Battlefield 5. It's like, okay, we're gonna show this thing and it's gonna zoom out. It's gonna be like a pile of dead bodies and it's gonna like zoom by. You've got all this crazy music going on. They all feel like kind of like the Inception trailer.
Because they all have the same noise half the time. It's the
because
same
you also have like gameplay, and then you've got the Inception black screen, and then it says some like enticing like sentence of like prepare for whatever. Like
it's super bombastic, and I still think like the best trailer. I want to say that I think I can confidently say it's probably the best video game trailer that I've seen. Is the Breath of the Wild trailer from I think it was either in 2017 or 2016, right before the game was slated to come out. The Switch was slated to come out. They did a trailer. I don't think it was for E3. It was like a Nintendo event trailer, the Breath of the Wild like final reveal. That is, it hits on vistas. It starts off super slow. You're panning around the world and seeing this massive like environment everywhere. You see the cool art style, and then just suddenly cuts to shots of people like running, and all the crazy like Zelda plot starts to unfold. And it's such a good trailer because they have voice lines playing over the back of it that actually like make you go, "What is happening in this game?" Love that trailer. Not indicative of the game. Because all of it happens in the past and none of it. It's such a weird trailer because I think that trailer is so good, and I like Breath of the Wild, but it is not a trailer for the game that we got.
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? It's like I've gotten to this point where like if a video game trailer comes out, there's no gameplay, but what's being shown, the pre-rendered, whatever, is indicative of what you're going to play. You don't know if that's actually what you're going to get until the game comes out. So you don't know if a trailer is like a good display of the game or not,
right?
Right, and until it comes out, right? So like recently I played through Sunset Overdrive, right? And I was curious as to like how this game was marketed because it was like one of the first games to be announced when Xbox One and PS4 was coming out. So I was looking back to see how it was marketed. And it's this pre-rendered thing, right? There's no actual gameplay, but everything that was in there was in the game. You've got grinding and like hanging on rails and stuff. You got wall running. You've got guns that actually made it into the game. You've got the multiplayer part. You've got how all this OD stuff works. It was all very indicative of the game, but you wouldn't know that until the game actually comes out because it's never clear if what you're seeing is like a cutscene, or it's supposed to emulate
Yeah.
gameplay in
Until
some
I
way.
see UI, I am always on red alert when I see
Yeah.
gameplay. It usually is not indicative. All right, so looping us back around, unless Alex, you have anything specific you want to talk about before we change subject? Good for the subject change.
I did have one
Go for
question
it.
that
Go
I was
for it.
interested in asking. With the talk on trailers, when do you think is the best applicable time for, and not like when we're hinging on a gameplay reveal or something like that, just for
Yeah.
like maybe a hype announcement type thing like that. When do you think is the right time for live action trailers for video games?
Live action.
Ooh, live action to me always screams it's the week, maybe 2 weeks before launch. Time to get hyped. It's time for the hype train to go through the roof. You know, reviews are going to come out in a couple days. You're ready for this crazy thing to happen. That's when you do the live action trailer. It's got to be good. It's got to be like a Halo level live action trailer. It's got to be.
I was gonna say
it either has to be good or it has to be super funny. Because if you have the super funny, like weird trailers they've done for, I think Avengers did one. I think a few other games have done like crazy bonkers live action trailers that are just so strange. Just Sony comes to mind when I think of them, because I recall seeing a bunch for a lot of different Sony products.
A good one that sticks out to me for live action. I don't know if anyone saw that Doom, like the Doom 2016 live action
Yes.
trailer.
I don't think so.
That was
No.
so cool, because I mean that's the game distilled in live action. You got your crazy score going on, and you're killing demons, and you look cool while you're doing it. That's all you need, and it's great for that specific thing.
Yep. And I remember Final Fantasy did the live action trailers for Final Fantasy 14. With the expansion launches, what they did is they just had random characters from the game standing in a living room, like talking to someone and just kind of like insulting them until they play the game.
I love that.
And it's really funny, and it
awesome.
works because it's funny. It's not, and I don't think it was intended to be funny, but it is. The scenarios where the advertisement is so off base that I think it ends up being really, really, it works better than it should.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's very funny. I recommend looking up the like Estinian live action trailer because it's very hilarious. But yeah, there's a lot of really fun stuff like that. All right, moving us into, I want to talk about action games. And I'm talking third person. We're talking your Batman Arkham Cities, your Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War. We're talking Bayonetta. We're talking Devil May Cry. What happened? Why, when did Western developers stop making this kind of game? Because it's interesting to me that there is that like switch between Western action games have pretty much always followed this. As soon as the parry and punch combo of like you have one button to punch, one button to parry, and you've got like a button to grab or something. As soon as that happened, every Western action game has adopted that. And I'm talking from like, you got Assassin's Creed doing it. You got wrestling games. That's how wrestling games work now. You got Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor. Arkham is popularized it. So
It might not feel original, but most companies that do it have either copied it well enough, but it feels good.
it does feel good.
I'm gonna push against that a little bit, because I feel like with a combat system like that, you need really good animations, and it's when you notice bad animations or you're like really just rubber banding everywhere is when it doesn't work anymore, and it just feels, something about it feels off.
Oh yeah,
Because
when you're
it's something where it has to feel smooth, like it has to feel natural, and when you don't have good enough animations, or your like natural lock on is kind of wonky, that's when you start to have issues. And I
flipping
feel like
into the starting pose.
that's a really difficult thing to balance, I think.
That's the problem that Shadow of Mordor had for a little while, and Shadow of War has at the start, with doing the Batman Arkham combat but with a sword is very functionally different, because a sword does not have the same impact that fist fighting does. So you don't have that like crunchy percussive sound whenever you hit something that really like blows the game feel into you. And it can take a little while for that to start to feel like a rhythm. It's less like immediately impactful, but it's not bad. So I think it's an interesting approach. And I also think there's like a lesser tier below that of like not quite AA, but lower budget AAA action games that go more in the vein of like Immortals Phoenix Rising, where you have more of that like fast and floaty combat system that has like a lot of combos and a lot of like quickly change direction and lock on and do all this crazy combo stuff. And I think that surprisingly stays the same basically wherever you go. That's how most like AA budget Japanese games play. Is they have that similar combat system. I've been playing a Chinese RPG called Gujian 3 occasionally that works that exact same way, where it's got the whole like very floaty, it feels very Immortal Phoenix Rising in terms of how it works. And I remember before that playing Tales of games felt like
the
that.
One difference that I can say between the two, where it's with even between the good, floaty feel of the combat with at least Eastern and Western developers, I think you can tell the difference if you don't see the studio name by seeing how long your character stays up in the air during a combo.
That's interesting to me because I think you're right about that in the Western case. Of most Western games like that, you will tell the combat difference if you can float mid-air for more than 30 seconds, you're playing Immortals Phoenix Rising. If you look at the Asian side, you could be playing literally anything because air juggling is like the Arkham combat system, but for Japanese games, it's been in everything. As soon as Devil May Cry did it once, everything's doing it now. You can't get an action game that doesn't have air juggling. So it's a very interesting difference. I think especially because the point I was going to originally make with this is I think you see very different control schemes come out of how these action games function, where when I'm playing a lot of Western action games, the combos are generally easy to pull off, and they're more based on like the correct button input at the right time. You're not doing a lot with the stick. The stick is mostly for movement. You're not doing like crazy combo inputs at the same time. When I play Devil May Cry, I gotta be flinging that stick everywhere. I gotta be going left and right. I gotta be going up and down to pull moves off.
Devil May Cry feels a lot more like you're doing competitive fighting game inputs, whereas
to a lesser
Western ones
degree,
feel like,
sure.
okay, you're pressing A 3 times, and then 3 times again, and then 2 times, and then 1 time, and then 3 times.
And of course, there are examples of that in Japan. 'Cause I think Dynasty Warriors is just press this button 4 times, and then press the other button, you'll do a finisher. So it definitely exists everywhere.
One thing that I've noticed, and I don't have nearly as much experience with Japanese action games, honestly, any of you guys, but one thing I've noticed is that Japanese games are totally fine to get completely like visually crazy with it. Not that that's a bad thing, but they get very over the top, whether it's with like animations or effects and stuff like that. And I feel like in general, like Western studios, like, no, we want something more grounded. We want something a little bit more like realistic, quote unquote. Like,
Yeah,
we want
I think it
something
definitely
that's a
depends
little
on the
bit
game.
slower.
Because when you look at like Marvel's Avengers, that game has the problem of there's so much visual noise during combat that you just don't understand what's happening. And at that point, you start to lose what's going on. I think Destiny, oddly enough, is an example of sometimes that can happen. Where if you're in like a mode that has accelerated ability energy or something, and just explosions are happening everywhere, all the different colors of light are on the screen at once, and you just like, it's fun because of that, but it better not be challenging.
Sometimes the muzzle flare is so big you can't even see your enemy, or sometimes you just want to use Telesto with
and
a
like
group of
Borderlands
friends
is
and
built
completely
around
ruin the
that.
game and crash it. Yeah,
that's how ARPGs and Borderlands function. I think it definitely goes by genre, for sure.
I was playing Borderlands 3 recently, and I had so much fun with I had, I think, 3 different guns equipped, where it was the one where you throw it, and instead to throw the gun to reload it instead of getting another magazine. All of those shot more bullets and projectiles, or one of them shot grenades, and then I had a grenade that rained down other grenades. And I've crashed the game once from that combo. I learned not to do it again.
Just fill the screen with
apparently,
so much.
I got to the point where it was actually too much.
Yep. That's always
really
the funnest
fun.
thing to me in that type of game is, can you hit the point where the game crashes? If so, you've won the game. You've done the best thing.
Takes hands off of keyboard. Why is there paint on my finger? Oh no, it's melting.
Yep. I think it's a lot of fun. I do want to circle back around a bit to Devil May Cry for a second, because I do want to talk about how I think a lot of Western developers, especially and primarily, not even just especially, but I think mostly only the AAA developers that make action games. So I'm talking your Ubisofts, your mostly Ubisoft, to be honest. There's not many others. doing it, your Eidos Montreal and whatnot, that make these action games, are afraid of complexity. They're afraid of gradual revealing of complexity, because like Devil May Cry, constantly touted by most people that play it as having one of the best combat systems there is for games. In that type of game, it doesn't work in everything, but Devil May Cry works very differently. And go look up a gameplay demo of someone playing Dante in Devil May Cry 5. You're gonna see them doing some crazy combos, some like mid-air juggling, swapping between weapons. Then go try and play Dante in Devil May Cry 5 and realize that you're probably doing like the same 2 hits and then standing still and then being like, wait, how do I extend this? Then getting hit and getting knocked out of your combo. And then you're going like, wait, what's going on? Then you pull the button down and you shoot your guns and you're like, but wait, why am I pressing this? And there's like a charge shot, what's going on? And then there's this like layer of skill between you and them that is so high that I think it discourages a lot of people. Probably justifiably. But
it's also
it's so rewarding. Like that's what makes those systems work so well. It's the same way for FromSoft with all the Souls games and Elden Ring. And Bloodborne, all of those games work on the basis of as soon as you learn the combat system, you're unstoppable. Like nothing can fight you at that point because you've solved the game. And Devil May Cry is absolutely the same thing, just to a very different degree of focus, where it's more about how long can I extend this combo? Can I get the song to the point where the vocals come in by doing good enough? That's like the big thing. When you hear the vocals come in most fights in Devil May Cry, that's when you know you're good.
It is important to point out too that like when you're comparing like an Ubisoft action game to something like Devil May Cry, right? An Ubisoft action game is typically an open world game and it's trying to achieve a lot of other things. And so having a more simplified combat system isn't necessarily
which I think is part of the discussion,
right? Because you're doing a lot of different.
Reiterate that I'm not saying it's bad.
Right.
I want to make sure that point is made. I'm not saying it's worse. What I am saying is it's odd to me that there's not an equivalent.
Right.
And I think it's weird that that doesn't exist.
Yeah, because it's I'm gonna one of my least favorite things, buzzwords that make me just melt in my seat out of fear and agony. Whenever a Western dev says the words "easy to learn, hard to master," I turn my computer off and I walk away, because almost every single time they are lying because they're incapable of doing it. I don't know what the whole Western idea of easy to learn, hard to master is, but easy to learn, hard to master to me is like you will be punished until you learn how to do it the baby right way or the actual right way. The baby right way is like, okay, you put on full Havel's gear in Dark Souls 1 with a big shield, and you just don't ever get knocked over because your poise is too high and you can take a million hits. You found your creative way to do it. I called the baby way because it's just not the dev intended way. You can't roll, you will fall over and then probably die when you try to roll. But it doesn't matter because you don't have to, because you could just tank hits. But when you learn the game and you learn the timing because you are being taught to very meanly by the game to do so, that you've mastered it. You've gone through the process of learning it because the game gives you all the tools and it gives you the capability to master it. When it's like a Western action game, or when FPS games say easy to learn, hard to master, I go absolutely crazy.
Well, and I think calling it a buzzword is apt, because I think what the problem is that they're Western devs, not all of them, but a lot of them are very obsessed with streamlining everything. It's like, how can we get as many people to play this as possible? So can we streamline everything so that nobody under the sun could possibly be confused about what they're supposed to do?
That's what I feel like what happened with between, the transformation from Morrowind to Skyrim to Fallout type.
Yeah. That's interesting to me, because I think you're right. I think that is certainly a thing that has happened repeatedly in most AAA places, and it's weird because it's a noble cause, right? Of streamlining a game so anyone can pick it up and start to play and learn how to play this game better. But you run into the issue of then you have a time limit. Your game is only going to be interesting for this many hours, right? Your combat can only support this long, and that to me was the Shadow of Mordor problem. Shadow of Mordor specifically is a game that, like, I've beaten that game. I have no desire to play it again, even though I think it's really good, because the combat you hit the ceiling with combat, where once you figured out, and this is the same in the Batman games, to be honest, once you figure out the flow of it, the game is no longer challenging. Like, there's nothing that will happen that can throw you off guard. And the Nemesis system went a long way when it came out to alleviating that, of making it so you always had a new challenge to contend with. But then you hit the problem of, well, I've only got like 2 attacks. If not just one. I've got a bow, and I've got my sword combo that's all on one button. And then I have like a finisher I can occasionally do. And that's just an instant kill.
Which doesn't really do that much.
But the stun doesn't do a whole lot, because you're always getting attacked by too many things for the stun to really matter. Yeah. It's more just a way to take a big threat out for a little bit. And it's like, that to me is the weird thing, because I remember, and this is kind of faded from modern games media talk, is Dynasty Warriors. People used to always point to Dynasty Warriors as being the simple combat game. The game that had like the most simple combat you could have. I'm currently playing a Dynasty Warriors game, Warriors of Orochi 3, which came out in 2011 on the PS3. This game, the combat consists of a combo string with every character you've got your square attack buttons and then your triangle finishers, you know? You got that. But then you have the added complexity of you're playing 3 characters at once, so you've got to constantly swap between them. You have attacks whenever you press a button to switch characters, they do an attack when they come out based on what you were just doing. You've got your special attack bar, which also changes, and you've got another special attack that you can do, that every single of the 120-something characters in this game is completely different, including when they're in the air and on the ground.
Oh.
So I go and I play this, and then I play Shadow of Mordor, and I'm like, wait a minute. It's flipped.
It's flip-flop.
It's flipped. The standard is now easier than Dynasty Warriors.
And that's the thing,
is
that
really
it's
funny.
And that's the thing, is that it's giving you all these options for these different situations, right? When I think of a simple melee combat system, it's been a while since I played it, but Fable 3 probably has. I don't think you can get more streamlined than Fable 3, right? I think you have guns, you have your magic, you have your sword, or you have your melee weapon. It is one button. Your melee attack in Fable 3 is one button. There are no combos, from what I remember. There isn't anything other than hitting the X button to hit things. That is it.
I mean, yeah, it's the same way, like, think of Skyrim, Morrowind, Oblivion, all the same. You've got one button. I mean, in those games, it's a little bit different because it's first person, and it's a lot harder to make melee combat feel meaty in a first person view, unless you put so much effort towards it that, like, Dying Light does, where you have to really focus on that melee combat.
But even then, in Dying Light, you're using the environment for things.
Yeah.
Like, you're kicking people off of rooftops or into spikes. You're activating different traps and stuff. Again, Fable, it's one button. You don't have the same kind of environmental,
that's RPGs as a whole, because like Kingdoms of Amalur, very similar. I think Kingdoms of Amalur does have like a combo finisher button, so
Doesn't it have a light and a heavy?
I think it has a light and a heavy.
Which is still more. That's still something other than one button.
What's the difference between Streamlined and Simplified?
That's the key question, isn't it? That's the question that nobody can answer. And I think the real answer to that is streamlining is reducing the complexity of systems that are obtuse, where they're hard to understand. What you want is systems that are understandable, but also have depth to them, where you want to be able to do different things. And a good example for this, I think, in most games that most people can relate to, is bullet drop. In an FPS. That is a good way to get your complexity into a game system that typically just involves pressing one button. It's you press your shoot button and you shoot, right? That's what you do. So how do you make that complex? Do you give guns different handling? You give them different drop patterns, different spray patterns, and then you've moved the complexity away from like an input barrier to an understanding barrier of, as you play the game, you learn how the system works on a more deep level, and then you can do different things. Because in Devil May Cry, I make it sound very complicated, but the gist of it is you still only have like 2 buttons for attacks. You have your gun button, your melee button, and you have your like melee combo ender button. The difference is once you learn you can move the stick at the same time to get different attacks out, it starts to basically play like a skateboarding game in a weird way, where you're doing the trick inputs to get your trick attacks out, you know? And I think working in that mindset of, okay, you don't have to do this, Like in Devil May Cry, you can totally beat the games without ever doing a lot of special attacks.
Really?
You only ever need to know like one that is the gap closer, and that's the thing that you learn very early on. But if you learn more, you're gonna start being able to treat the game. You're gonna be able to do things to this game that no one ever intended, which is the fun part of you get to just like take enemies apart and you look like the cool martial arts movie hero as you're doing all that, which I think is the fantasy of that type of game.
Yeah.
And so that's the point. And like the thing is, it wouldn't work if it was easy, because then you don't feel like you earned it, and then it's not rewarding. So it has to be, you have to hit that complexity line, which is really hard to do, and like very few developers can do it. It's like that's a reason Devil May Cry games don't come out all the time anymore. They're incredibly difficult to hit that line. You have to test so heavily. It's why FromSoft games come out once every 3 years. You know, they have to test them and make sure those things are lining up so that the bosses aren't incredibly frustrating. They just need to be mostly frustrating and
Mostly frustrating.
There's a fine line.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to look at when you're thinking about like simplified versus streamlined is depth, right? Because to me, something that's streamlined still has depth to it. Something that's simplified has that completely gutted out, right?
Mhm.
Like I think of I'm going back to Shadow of Mordor versus like Batman again, right? They're using essentially the same kind of combat system. It's a very like sort of streamlined thing. You don't have to remember a lot of combos. The difference is Batman gives you a lot more options, right? There's batarangs, there's explosive jelly, there's the disruptor kind of like gun thing. You've got your remote batarangs, you've got a bunch of different combos and stuff. That's a streamlined combat system that still has depth because it's giving you a lot of options in combat, right? And it's also giving you a lot more options in stealth. Whereas in Mordor, it's like you've got your sword, you've got like a finisher thing, you've got like a stun thing, you got your bow. That's it. A lot of that depth that was in like a Batman combat system, especially Arkham Knight, is kind of gone now because they're not giving you nearly as many tools.
Yeah,
And so
because they've shifted the focus.
streamlining.
The depth
That's
no longer
streamlining
comes
to a
from
point.
you; it comes from the
Yeah.
enemy. That's the point of the Nemesis system. Is now you need to check. Well, okay, I have these things I can do, and now I can look at the environment and be like, is there an explosive barrel there? Is there a thing I can poison here to take advantage of like this enemy's weakness? Is there not? And now I need to move them to a different area to fight them. And it adds this like strategy layer to it that I think in Shadow of War especially works really well, where the depth is no longer can I win the fight? The depth is how can I make the fight something I will win when I get there? Like how can I rig the system to the point where I know I'm going to beat this through taking advantage of all these opportunities the game has given you to take advantage of it. It's a system that's meant to be abused. So I think that's like the streamlining line of with a streamlined system, you want to introduce your player to it gradually. You want to have them start learning from the basics, and then it gets more and more complex as it goes on. And even I think we use Skyrim as an example, but Skyrim does have complexity. It's just mostly in spell casting. It's kind of removed from melee and bow combat and moved into, okay, as you level up, you're going to get access to these abilities and shouts and spells and whatnot that will augment your combat abilities, and you can like use different things. Because I think it's a game that like a lot of people don't unlock shouts now just because they don't play the main story. But the shouts as a system are really well designed in that they augment playstyles of a very different variety by giving you that one ability you can use at will to kind of like change the flow of what you're doing. It just is a control issue of like, okay, this system could be really cool if I could hot swap what's in my hands, right? If I could drop a sword and a shield and pick up a magic spell to use like an alteration thing and then pick my sword and shield back up. But to do that in the game is like 5 different inputs that usually involve a pause screen. And like going into a favorites menu and navigating and clicking different buttons, and it's just a lot less fluid than it should be. And I think that's always like the core issue when people try to change Skyrim combat. Is the issue isn't it's not it doesn't need to be Dark Souls. It needs to have the depth that the system already has, but just be more accessible in terms of actually like having it be executable in a way that is fun and not just nonsense pressing buttons.
It comes back to that thing where it's like, and I've said this several times before, You can have a game that's easy and still be fun, because an easy game, as long as it's having you engage with its systems and it's still, you know, activating your brain
Yeah.
in some way. You can have an easy game that's fun. If you're thinking of a lot of different things while fighting, even if it's not that hard, it can still be a lot of fun. Shadow of War is not a very difficult game, but it's giving you these options to make it more interesting. Batman's the same way.
Again,
It's
Wyatt, I
not
gotta tell you,
a-
try brutal mode. It's gonna become very difficult
am gonna
very quickly.
I am gonna change it because I think the Nemesis system works better if it's more difficult. But
Yeah.
again, Batman is not a particularly difficult game, but it throws in all of these things to kind of keep your brain going, right? It's like, okay, here are ninjas where you have to counter them multiple times, or here are shield enemies where you have to jump over them and hit them from behind. It's still playing with your brain. It's still engaging you in systems, even if it's not particularly hard.
Mhm.
Yep.
And I think that's a big, possibly even depending on how broad you want to carry it, that is the big, like, Western Eastern dev divider, is that a lot of Western devs around here will be like, here's the system, and here's, you can play around, and the button prompt will come up on the screen nice and big, and the enemies will allow you to do that to them, and it's exactly as you were saying, like towing the line of, while being easy to comprehend at like a first glance for 90% of people, and it's just you being able to do the satisfying things that keeps your brain interested. In a lot of Eastern games, it's like, here are the systems. We're going to start throwing everything at you. You have all the tools. We're throwing everything at you. You need to figure out how to use them.
Right.
And that it's different, like,
Yep.
teaching tolerances of not necessarily easing someone in, of just, but like having it like, this is here for the fun of the equivalent of solving a puzzle. Meanwhile, an Eastern Japanese game might be like, okay, here's the exhilaration of solving a puzzle while the ceiling, which is covered in rusty, bloody spikes, is slowly descending down over you, and like metal music is blaring in the background so loud that you can't hear yourself think. Like, that is the difference of of, not because I don't want to say babying, like I'm like a pretentious elitist or something, because it's wrong. It's like, it's just like having it's the difference between just like doing like tic-tac-toe with a friend versus doing like a crossword puzzle or whatever. Like, take that as like fun little, like, okay, I beat you this time. Oh, we tied. We did the thing that, like, the combination always results in no one winning. Haha, or whatever. Let's drop another one. Like, quick little, like, my brain is being activated of where to put this little thing next. But crossword puzzle is like, all right, now I'm starting to think really far ahead. If I put this, if the word here has an R on this square, then what does that mean for this 20 square long word that has the prompt over here that has something I don't know? But if I do this more, this, like, it's oversimplifying it in a weird way, but it's like different levels of complexity and simplicity between a lot of, and this is obviously, there are exceptions to this, like every rule, between Eastern and Western games. And I feel like in a lot of Japanese games, because for whatever reason, culturally, games wise, I feel like it's a lot more acceptable to have, like, oh, I need to get this combo of items that will heal me out. Time to open up the menu and go through it really fast to get the things. And they made menuing really satisfying because at JRPG time, I guess.
Yeah.
Like literally, like, blaring in your face, easiest way to see the difference between something that is streamlined to a mere sheen and oversimplified to the point where I don't even have to think anymore and it's not that fun, is a game with menuing. If like you go into Pokemon or whatever, and it's like breeding. If you ask me, well, if you ask me right now how Pokemon breeding works, I wouldn't be able to tell you, because I don't, like, there's nothing in game to, like, you have the stats. There's nothing in game to track. Oh, this will give you this. No, you got to go to the website databases to have all it, because they just it's there, I guess.
Figure it
But
out.
you're telling me you want to fuse personas? Oh, well, here's like 6 layered menus of when you look at them all at once. It's like, oh, that's a lot of numbers and letters and different symbols and things I don't know yet. I'm scared. 10 hours later, it's like, yeah, right. I need the Pixie and the Fornius, and if I do that together, then I get Oberon, and then I take Oberon the other thing and do the 3-way split. Then I get the other guy who goes to this thing that I have the social link for that puts 8 more levels on him, and it has like 3,000 extra XP, and it gets these other abilities from the other things. It's like, okay, millions miles more deep, millions miles more complicated. When I look at it for the first time and go, ugh. It's so much more satisfying because they made it easy to get to that satisfying point once you sit down and learn it.
And what that adds to is a sense of progression, not just for the player character, but for just the player, right? Being able to understand how these systems work isn't like player character progression, it's progression of the character. It's like, I understand this game much better than I did, in my first hour.
It's like learning a board game, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing too is when you have a game where it's like, okay, we're gonna have this system, but you don't have to engage with it that much. It's there if you want to, but you don't have to. Sometimes what that shows, and again, not every case, there's exceptions to the rule. What that shows a lot of the times is an extreme lack of confidence. It's like, okay, we want this system to be in here, but we don't want the whole game to really hinge on it because what if it doesn't come out that way, right? Like you play Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War. There is such confidence in that Nemesis system because the whole game hinges
built around
on
that one thing.
If that system doesn't work, the game is useless and a waste of your time. But they knew this is a really cool system. We're going to make our whole game around it because that's how much confidence we have. That is the identity of the game. We know
and there are absolutely Western games that get this right? Like there's simple example, look at Spider-Man. Spider-Man games, one thing has to be right for them to be good. If I swing, is it fun? If the answer to that question is yes, it doesn't matter what the rest of the game is. It could not have combat at all, and I would still play it for 10 hours minimum.
I believe a great jazz singer once said, "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swag."
That's true. True words never been spoken.
And I do also want to mention Spider-Man again, because I was talking about Devil May Cry having the complexity that's layered in. Spider-Man, less so Miles Morales, but Spider-Man 1 on the PS4 has a similar type of complexity layered into the combat in the items you unlocked and how your gadgets work. And essentially what you instead have, instead of a button combo in a combination button input, like a Devil May Cry where you're tilting the stick and doing A or B at the same time, with that you have, okay, I'm going to open this radial menu, time is going to slow down so I have a moment to think, and then I can use whatever tool is appropriate to the situation. Or I can just walk into the middle of this camp that I'm way over leveled for, drop every single gadget that I have, and watch everything just explode in webs. It's very satisfying in a different way, and I think that is like kind of where that complexity in Western games comes in a little bit. But the issue is often that you have the complexity, you don't have anything that warrants the player using it.
Yeah.
Because I recall I've played Spider-Man PS4 twice. First time, I don't think I touched half the gadgets. I don't think I used them past like the second time that you had to in the story, and just never touched them. Second playthrough, I put it on harder difficulty, used them constantly. Still wasn't necessary. I totally could have beaten it without ever using any of them. But when you are using them, the game is a lot more fun because things are getting a little wild. They're hectic. You have solutions to problems that are much bigger. So it feels like, okay, if I have the solution to a bigger problem, throw a bigger problem at me, right?
I think the Witcher 3 did that as well on the easier difficulties, where it's just like, okay, in normal, you can just swing your sword and use your sigil or glyph or spell signs, and it's fine. When you get up there, you actually have to, use the potions, use potions, have specific ones prepared, know extensive research on the monster you're going to fight, read their bestiary entries, have all of your oils updated and applied.
What's interesting, because Witcher 3 has alchemy builds, and alchemy builds in The Witcher 3, I would hazard a guess that most people have not done one, because when you play an alchemy build, it is going to feel worse for a good while, but once you get all the materials you need to craft the things, it is by far and away the most powerful thing in the game.
And when you're in a good alchemy build, your character is Geralt is always going to have those black veins on his face, but it's not going to matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you overdose on your potions, because sometimes you start to get perks that make that a benefit to you. So it just changes how you play the game, which I think is where RPG complexity should come in. Is those differences that make it so I don't need to necessarily do this if I'm not playing that kind of build, but when I'm playing, I'll throw Morrowind out there, and I have access to magic that's super easy to get in every city I go to. I have access to weapons. I have spellcrafting. It's like, oh, I have this problem. My stamina is constantly running low. Solution, there's like 10 solutions to that problem. I can go buy a potion. I can go make a potion. I can go buy a spell. I can go make a spell. And then I have
steal
the thing.
a potion.
I could steal a potion. And then I have the solution to that problem. Or I could be the person's very, stubborn and doesn't solve the problem, and I just walk around in constant slow mode to reach
Madman.
You have
That's
options.
right. You gotta have a carrying capacity. Oh,
Yep.
that's another thing that they did too, where like with the simplification, there are varying levels of how slow you get depending on what percentage of how encumbered you are in Morrowind. And then in Oblivion, it's just you go past that threshold, you cannot move anymore.
Oh
And in
my.
Skyrim, it's okay, you can walk, you just can't run, but you have a horse, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think different approaches have different things. Where Morrowind is the kind of game that I think benefits from that heavyweight management system. Skyrim is the kind of game where there's so much to do and it's so close to each other. There's so many things around every corner. If it's any heavier, I can't do one dungeon. I can't get through a single dungeon without maxing out my inventory. Maybe I'm a hoarder. Maybe that's the problem.
I've
but then stop
tried
giving me
to
so much loot.
I've tried to pawn off this
Not my
really
fault. It's your
neat.
fault.
I've tried to pawn off and sell this really neat ebony spear that I found a couple of dungeons ago. The problem is, I didn't make my character be a people person, so now no vendor has enough
Yep.
money to buy it. So I just and I don't really have I don't have a house with display racks in it yet. So I just have the spear laying on my bed. Just like, yeah, that looks
Where it
neat.
belongs.
I have that, and I have like oh god, what's that cup artifact? Like the cup of deep sippy or something like that on
In which
the
game?
bedroom dresser. Morrowind.
Okay.
The
Okay.
cup of deep something.
I was like, wait, what? Are we
Deep
still on
sippy.
Skyrim? Yep.
We're in putt-putt.
It's interesting to me because I've also been playing Fallout 4 more recently than the other Bethesda games, and I downloaded some mods for that basically turn it into a like city management simulator, where now the goal is you build all the settlements, set up supply lines between them, and then you get like a bunch of random quests based on the people that come in. It is just a different game. It's not the same game. It's barely an RPG anymore. It is city management game. And it's very fun that you can take a game in this engine and turn it to that. And that I think is always going to be the benefit of Bethesda games. Is if you can do that, your game is now infinitely replayable. It's just, it doesn't matter if the game's actually good. All that matters is that other people can make it good.
Yeah,
I was confusing the bitter cup and the spear of bitter mercy.
And you got the cup of sippy.
of
Yeah.
deep sippy.
Cup of deep sippy.
You have to make
You
a
have to
cup
put
of
that in
deep
the game
city
now.
now.
Yeah.
Got to be some proper 3D models of that. All right. That's most of it. I do want to bring one last set of games up just to do a quick mini bit on. That's Overwatch and Gundam Evolution.
Oh,
We've played these two games now, and I think they actually demonstrate the complexity and like simplicity thing pretty well. Of Overwatch being a game that is now a good few years old. I believe 2016 is when it came out, right? Somewhere around
Something
then.
like that.
And then we have Gundam Evolution, which is not out yet, but we've all spent some time with it in the playtest. Aside from Alex, poor baby Alex, not getting to play his Gundam Evolution.
I get to play with them in real life, and I have plenty of
That's true.
Zaku's to keep. I don't need anyone else. I don't need a relationship. I have
Yeah.
massages.
I just have my master grade.
Ah!
Gundamos. I just think it brings an interesting thing to the picture of. I don't know that I would call Gundam Evolution better than Overwatch. That's a big statement that I don't think I'm ready to make. But I had more
Brett's
fun
willing to
playing
make it.
I had
Brett's
more
willing
fun
to make
playing it. And I think what it comes down to now, a lot of it is that I've played a lot of Overwatch. That is a huge part of that equation. Is I've played a bunch of Overwatch. I'm kind of over it at this point. So playing something that is like Overwatch, I know you heard it.
It's too easy for anyone to even make, so don't even
so she
bother.
had to just
Come
snicker,
on.
and I was like,
You
I don't
Just
know about it.
continue.
Wyatt,
I gotta
You
say,
listening,
the amount of restraint that I am deploying right now.
I think everyone looked at your camera view at the same time after he said it. I immediately looked and saw you smile right after he said it.
Come on, you're
Oh
stronger
my
than this,
God.
Wyatt. We
Ryan,
can beat it together.
I'm not. Listen, Ryan, keep going.
Hey, underrated over it. All right, so I think with Gundam Overwatch, you have the benefit of this new engine, new game. It's a lot faster. You have the complexity of dashing, which like dashing to me is the streamlined system. That is the peak example of how you streamline a movement system, and it still has a lot of complexity because the complexity comes from every suit has different dashing handling.
Mhm.
Everything has a different number of dashes. If I'm playing the Sazabi, I have my one chonky dash. And I know, and the enemy knows, when I use that dash, I'm out. I'm now in that place until the end. And it makes that very fun kind of moment-to-moment decision-making where everything in the game has this capability. It varies per thing, and you got to kind of get used to that. And it's an interesting way to kind of level the playing field, because if you intelligently hold a dash, you have a out pretty much all the time. Especially if an enemy used theirs to engage you. Well, guess what? You're able to flee now because they use theirs, so they can't chase you, unless they're like one of two suits that specialize in it. So I think it's an interesting approach of adding a layer on top of what the Overwatch gameplay normally is, where you have this different thing going on. Because Overwatch, I think when you boil it down, is basically just an arena hero shooter.
Absolutely.
With objective modes, which is not a bad thing. That's a very good thing in most cases. So, yeah, I think it's just an interesting barrier of adding that little wrinkle of complexity to it.
Mm-hmm. And you also, in Evolution's case, you have like there's the Methus is the closest thing to a healer, but then there's like 4 other mobile suits that have healing or quick revive as like other options, and I think that is the other thing.
I mean, revival
having
is like a big thing in that.
Yeah, which is something that I thought was going to be something that worried me, because my experience with that is Rainbow Six Siege, and I shouldn't have to say anything after I say that. But it's very easy to implement something in a way where it becomes more frustrating than like in a lot of games. It's like, why would I go in to revive my friend when they're just going to die anyway? And it's going to put me in a bad position, so I'm just not even going to bother. That wasn't really a problem in Gundam Evolution because it happens so fast, and everyone's like everyone fills so many roles, and they're so useful because of that you really do want to bring your teammates back up.
Yeah.
And I meet like my friends and I always ended up picking each other back up, not even just because we're in the same voice call, but just because like, oh, all right, that guy got you, but I just took him out, and we're making a push like right now because the game moves at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I have a quick revive, even though
This is
I'm
no
the
place
sniper.
to die.
It's exactly this is,
Yeah.
damn, not here. And then I'm all the way at the back of the map because I'm a sniper, but I got the quick revive. Pew! All right, Ryan's back up. Now he's ready to go back in, and we're ready to continue the push.
Because it turns into a game about kill confirming rather than just getting a kill, which is it's a small distinction, but it changes how it plays to a level that is pretty crazy. Of now, the entire experience is like, okay, you down someone, doesn't matter. Did you actually finish them? And most of all, did you make the mistake of finishing the entire enemy team at once? Because if you did, you're probably just as bad of a spot as if you had not done that.
Oh,
So,
quick question about Gundam Overwatch. With dealing damage to enemies, because I was reminded of this because we were recently watching that during Goon Knight. Do they show damage on the models when they're?
No, I wish.
Yeah,
I wish
it
they
would be
did. That
great.
would be so cool.
But no.
But no.
You have
Yeah,
like
gotta save
you
the
have,
It's not
like,
a
weathering
deal
for
breaker,
skins.
but it would be really cool if they did.
you have like a pair of hands come down and they start taking off pieces.
Yeah, they start taking off the
Amazing.
plastic.
No more pauldron for you.
You got
God.
Gundam
It's not
Breaker
like-
for that.
It's not like
Yeah.
crunching metal. It's just a.
You see an exposed ball joint on one side. It's just really obvious that they're model kits instead.
Yeah.
I love that.
That'd be fun. But yeah, I do think that it's just I don't know whether or not to attribute that to the difference between like development outlooks, or more to attribute that just to the amount of time that's changed. Then Overwatch 2 gets thrown in the mix, and I'm just confused.
Overwatch 1.5.
As are the devs.
Overwatch, but at sunset this time.
Overwatch, but new.
And that's the only difference.
But not really. So, yeah, I think that's the Overwatch discussion. I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's an interesting point for exactly what we're talking about. All right, that's it. We did the show. It's time for shoutouts. Been going for the full amount of time. As always, whoever is going to say it first gets to do their shoutout first.
I'm gonna do my shout out.
Nice save. Nice save.
My shout out goes to a lot of the very funny orcs especially in Middle Earth Shadow of War. There are some that's like a bard, and his lute has like an axe blade on it. So
Oh,
he'll
that's
like
wonderful.
kill you with his lute, or there's one that will like recite poetry to you as his like opening line, and it's very goofy, and it's amazing.
That's pretty good.
It's great.
All right, who's ready?
Mine will be. Listen, it's even as a Gundam boy and all the main series are 50 episodes long. It still takes a lot for an old man like me to waste time watching a 50 episode anime. But boy howdy, I sit down and in like 1 week I have finished all of Turn A Gundam, which is the full 50 episodes, and I think it might at least be tied for my favorite one because it's just
Oh wow.
like, imagine Studio Ghibli made a Gundam series, and then they just decided, because fan
high
service and
praise.
normal, fan service and
I-
normal things is like girls, and those are gross. Fan service for Gundam fans is showing an old robot doing the move. And the funny thing about Turn A is that the shortened version of it is that basically it takes place at the end of everything. At the end of the original show, at the end of all the spin-offs that could possibly come out, because it was the original creators, you're okay to make spin-offs because they all end in my show anyway. And listen, when another thing shouts out Shining Finger and uses it, I'm gonna enjoy the show just as much as the show that has Shining Finger. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Go
That's all
watch
it
it.
takes.
It's good.
Someone with no context as to what that means, I have so many questions.
Don't worry. I will answer
Why,
all
you'll
of them.
feel the shining finger one day.
When you mentioned
God.
when you mentioned what would happen, Ghibli and Gundam, I would cream, Brett.
Yes,
I would
I
cream.
did.
All right, Alex, you ready? You gotta hit us with one.
I do. Because we're like not really short on time, but I didn't find a good place to talk about these yet. Maybe at some other point. But I wanted to so this is just the shout out. The games, Outlast and Pathologic 2.
Ooh,
Both good.
we're gonna
but
have a
in different
pathologic
ways.
discussion at one point, Alex. That's
Yes.
guaranteed to happen. We're gonna take over an episode and talk about pathologic.
Oh
So-
yeah.
All right. Look, I've been playing a lot of weird games recently. I've been in a kick of playing strange things, including a lot of Dynasty Warriors games and Blue Reflection, which is a magical girl JRPG. Now, I was like, what Dynasty Warriors game am I going to play? I went back to the PS3 one. Good old PS3. Warriors of Orochi 3 is like one of the best games I've played. Not in terms of like the best constructed or anything. Man, 120 characters that all have different movesets. You've got every one of them's got like 4 different things. You unlock them by this crazy time travel story where the concept is
Oh.
when you have lost the fight. You lost the fight. That was the end of the thing.
Oh.
The first mission is you lost it. And then this magic time travel person comes and goes, yo, you lost that fight real bad. Why don't we go back and get you more allies so you don't lose the fight real bad? And then
Yo,
you go
homie,
back.
You got your butt kicked. Let's fix
The
it.
whole concept is you can go back in the timeline of any character on your roster. So you start with 3 people, you go back, you rescue like 5 more. And then those characters might unlock more missions because the only way you time travel is you can send someone back to a time that they were already present in. So they have to have been present at an event. So you can, when you inevitably capture one of the enemies, you can then send them back before the fight started. And like send them back to the before times, and now you've made the depth of this far more interesting. It's a game that I'm like very surprised came out in 2011 and didn't get more buzz than it did, and is also like hard to find on modern platforms. I was able to find it on PS4, but it would be a perfect Nintendo Switch game. So I would love to see this.
Ryan.
Oh yeah, I would love to see this pop up on something. It was on PS3, but it was on other platforms too. It was on like Xbox 360 as well. So it's not that it was limited to PS3.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just weird to me that it's not on other things. It was on the Wii U of all things, in a port. It just never got transferred anywhere else. So yeah, it's wild. It's a really good game, and I love that they had the gall to take these characters from 3 Kingdoms China and give one of them a rocket cannon on his arm. And because he's a character that was sick once in actual history in a fight, he was just kind of sick, and he didn't die or anything. He was just kind of sick. He's now permanently sick in the game, and when he does a special, he looks like he's about to die and like falls over on the floor and then crawls back up. It's
Oh my
amazing.
God.
It's one of the funniest things I've seen in a long time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a very good game. Check out Warriors of Orochi 3 if you ever see it on sale. It is permanently in the Warriors zone of being full price. So, all right. With that, we've ended the show. As always, Tuesday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern Time on the podcast platform of your choice. We'll be back next week. That's the show. We did it.
I still have pollen in my eyes.
Excellent.
Oh, no. What a callback.
I know that together.
God.
I have
Can't
a
get the
question.
pollen out.
How proud of you guys, of me, that I didn't do an Overwatch pun?
Very.